Hey, I'm Michael, and this is Michael in the Middle. It's an intergenerational relational podcast for people who are interested in better human interaction. I'm glad you're here. Hey, happy 2024, Michael in the Middle, friends. It is so good to be back on camera, to be back on tape, as it were, to record the first episode of a new year and the first episode since a major life shift for me and for my family. Several of you who have been faithful listeners or folks who have tuned in via YouTube to engage with this podcast are aware that my father, Talmadge Johnson, Walker Talmadge Johnson Jr., to be precise, passed from this life in the early hours of December the 6th. And it was ironic that I had recorded just about 36 hours earlier the last podcast that we had in this series with my good friend Steve Pennington. And we were talking about our fathers, and Steve's dad, Lewis, had passed several years before. And I talked about being fortunate to still have my father with me at that point. Sadly, he did pass away just shortly after that. But it's been a great time of reflection. While there is some sadness in losing our father and in an earthly sense, he lived such a great life, and he lived long and well, and we had a great celebration service for him. And these intervening weeks have been good for me to do a lot of soul searching and thinking through just how blessed I've really been in the process of being his son. Great times with family since then, and we are doing well as we remember the good life that my dad and my mom lived, and so many others who have been special to us. As you get older and you lose more people in your life, you start to take stock of, I guess, in a more serious way, how you're living your life, or at least that's been the case for me. And it's made me very introspective in a lot of ways, but also it's allowed me to celebrate in a lot of wonderful ways. I can't think of anything this morning that gives me greater joy than to know that my father, while he was on this earth, lived a good life. He was good to people. And I want to talk a little bit about that, motivated by the memory of my father and the way that he lived and the way that he interacted with other people. I want to share something that I've actually been sharing in different events along the way over the last 2 or 3 years. Some of you know that I studied the subject of generosity as I worked through a doctoral program, and I've mentioned that several times on the podcast. It's not to bring any kind of attention to myself for doing advanced degrees, but it is something that I have lived with from the standpoint of doing the hard work that is involved in an academic enterprise like a doctoral program. But in the process, it not only deepened my understanding of the subject, it deepened my resolve to encourage people to live generously. And so I want to talk about that here in just a minute, but it's all set against the backdrop of what I hope to be able to share in every way through this podcast and through a website that we're working on with my producer, Rob Walls of Varnish Media. We're looking at perhaps some courses that can be offered that will encourage you in your work, either in your organization or in the places that you live and work. And so I'm going to talk a good little bit about generosity here today, but in general terms about the subject of goodness. I don't think there's anything bad about being good. And I plan to be working on that thought, that pattern of thinking that it is a good thing to live a good life and to do good in the lives of others. But for this particular episode, I want to talk about generosity more specifically and where it takes its place in the subject of goodness. I am convinced that if we will pursue a good way of living, that actually we could achieve even higher levels of greatness in our goodness. So I believe that goodness can lead to greatness, and not in the sense of achievement, but in the sense of doing things that will benefit the world in which we live. I've said this many times, and I've said it repeatedly on this broadcast, that I don't think we change the world. When we look at the events of the world that are taking place right now, it is absolutely overwhelming. And I feel powerless to do anything about what's going on, sadly, in these troubled spots around the globe. But I can do something for the people that I'm going to encounter today here in Myrtle Beach, and talk about a good backdrop. The Atlantic Ocean out there, even though it's a little too chilly probably to get in the water. Boy, what a beautiful setting. This is a good day to do something good in the life of someone else. So here we go. Let's talk about what generosity is, based on some of the things that I learned as I studied the subject. As I developed a working definition of what generosity is, I was led to a very helpful resource at the University of Notre Dame. They have what they call the Science of Generosity Project, and it's a whole academic enterprise dedicated to resourcing, researching the subject of generosity. And so after studying a lot of different things about what generosity is, here's what I came to use as the working definition for generosity for my study. And I believe it's a good one for all of us to be thinking about. Generosity is the virtue of giving good things to others freely and abundantly. I'll say that again. Generosity is the virtue of giving good things to others freely and abundantly. I love that. It's a short statement, but it has a whole lot to say. The term generosity that we use in our modern understandings actually came from a Latin term, generosus, that when it was first being discussed in the literature centuries ago, generosus, the Latin term, referred to a nobility of birth. I mean, I don't fully understand all of that, but I know that's what the original connotation was. Generosus referred to a nobility of birth. So you talk about royal families and, wealthy aristocracy, those kinds of things. Generosus referred to a nobility of birth, but over time, that evolved into an understanding of a nobility of purpose. We all have a noble purpose. We each have the capacity to do something significant in this life, and so that's kind of the jumping off point for how I wanted to describe people in my life who gave me gifts freely and abundantly that changed my life. And I want to do so in the context of letting you know that you have the capacity to do that in someone else's life as well. Because in each of these cases, these people were just who they were in many respects in my life, but they gave me these great gifts. I miss my parents terribly. My mom died November 24th 24th, I believe it was the 24th of 2021. It was the Wednesday night before Thanksgiving of 2021. Died very suddenly. She was in the process of getting all the things that she wanted to fix for Thanksgiving dinner, which was being hosted at our house. And she just died of sudden cardiac arrest. My dad, just over 2 years later, really in very similar fashion, although um, uh, he had just been at a Sunday school class Christmas dinner and prayed a beautiful prayer of benediction within 20 minutes as he and his friend Wendell were leaving the church to head back to the retirement center where they lived. My dad gave a heave and breathed his last and was gone just like that. My parents invested themselves to the very end in being involved with others or doing things for others. And I cannot overemphasize how blessed I am by my parents that they gave me the gift of life and they poured life into me until the moments that they passed from this life. Um, I I am in large part the person I am because of the family into which I was born. Aren't we all? You know, I mean, so I'm grateful for that. My parents were generous in their love and their kindness, and even with their money, if there was something that we wanted and it wasn't going to be a hindrance to who we were as boys, my brother and I benefited greatly from the gift of life that our parents gave us, but um, the gifts that they poured into the life that we shared together. I'm grateful for my parents who gave me the gift of life. I'm grateful for my fourth grade teacher. Her name was Gracie Bumpus. When I was a kid, growing up in my younger years, I was around adults most of the time. I had a better than average vocabulary for a little guy my age. At 3, 4, 5 years old, people would talk about, boy, Michael, you know a lot of big words. And for some of my friends whom I still work with to this day, they'll kid me about some of the words that I throw out there. I had developed a pretty big vocabulary because I was raised mostly around adults. By the time I arrived at elementary school age, um, we moved during the fall of what would have been my kindergarten year, and I did not go to kindergarten. And apparently, that's a pretty good bridge between being a toddler and an elementary school kid. Is that half day kindergarten program. I didn't go to kindergarten. I just started straight into first grade. And I wasn't prepared for it, and honestly, for the first 3 years of my schooling, I was a mess. I invented reasons why I didn't need to go to school. Um, I could make myself feel sick, and try to convince my parents that I didn't need to go to school that day. First 3 years of schooling were rough. But in the fourth grade, Gracie Bumpus changed my life because she recognized that I was struggling, but she also recognized that I had some ability. And she gave me the gift of encouragement to believe that I could do better, even as a fourth grader. And I remember her smile being so warm and the look in her eye when she would say, Michael, you can do this. You can do this. Um, as I moved into my teen years, my father, who was pastoring a church there in Oklahoma City, hired a man named Larry Ryan to be his first full-time staff member with a primary emphasis on ministering to the youth group. And we had a pretty large group by that time. But during my teen years, Larry found a way to give me the gift of his time, even though he had a lot of other people that he had to pay attention to. Um, when we were together, or when he would include me in smaller groups of guys and girls to be involved in something related to the church youth group, Larry showed me the significance of investing time in people. Larry gave me the gift of time. Um, when I got to high school, it was a pretty interesting and at times painful transition. We moved from Jackson, Mississippi between my ninth and 10th grade years. Um, and I had gone first through the ninth grades at Western Oaks Elementary and Junior High School in Oklahoma City, out on the western edge of the city. And it, uh, it was not what you would call culturally diverse. It was a great school. We had a great time. Didn't hear bad things said about people from other ethnic backgrounds, but it was just, it was very, well, it was very much a white student body in so many ways. Moving to Jackson, Mississippi, with the desegregation laws firmly in place in 1975, um, I would drive my car each day from South Jackson toward the downtown area to Jim Hill High School. And Jim Hill had been founded in the early 1900s for African American students because the schools at that time, were still deeply segregated, and you had to establish schools for African American students to have a place for them to go. So fast forward 60 or so years, and Jim Hill became segregated by law, and there were some challenges associated with that. Not that it was a bitterly divisive place. The faculty was pretty well 50-50 black and white. The student body was more 70-30 black to white. But we were going to school in a part of town that actually was, primarily African American. And it was the first time in my life that I'd ever experienced what it was like, maybe to be quote unquote the other, to be in the minority. It changed my life. It was absolutely the kind of thing that I needed to become a better, stronger person. And the 10th grade year was tough. I've talked about that, with a lot of people over the years. I've written about it. But when I came back for my 11th grade year, I was introduced to a lady named Mary Meredith. And if you're watching, you can see Mary's picture there now. She turns out was a brilliant English and journalism teacher. She was the sponsor of the school paper, The Echo, and she invited me to be a part of that staff. And I ended up being the sports editor for 2 years. I actually won some awards with the Mississippi Scholastic Press Association for my column in the Sportlight. And I would write stories about athletes there at Jim Hill, and we had some amazing athletes from 1975 to 78. Actually, those were the years that I was there. It extended, to years before and after I was there as well, with NBA and NFL stars, track stars. Wow, there was a great number of high caliber athletes, but also high caliber people. So I would talk about the athletic exploits of some of our students. We didn't have a great self-concept as a school in a lot of ways. There were other schools in town that had maybe a better reputation, and I began to sense that maybe I could use this sports column as a means of encouraging and fostering enhanced school spirit. And sure enough, I was able to do that. But in the Sportlight, and I still have some copies of those papers back there from the late 70s. That was a great time. Mary Meredith was not just an English and journalism teacher, a beautiful African American lady. She was the wife of James Meredith, the first black student at the University of Mississippi. I found myself sitting in the Meredith's living room. I was sitting with living history. I was sitting with one of the most iconic civil rights figures in American history in his home because his wife was my teacher. Just have to sit with that for a minute, because with all of the racial tension that we still seem to grapple with. I remember in the late 70s being with Mary and James Meredith and other black students there from Jim Hill. And we were friends, we were colleagues, we trusted each other, we believed in each other. And I don't remember maybe more than a handful of times that we addressed the fact that we had different colors of skin. Mary Meredith gave me the gift of understanding that revolutionized my life because she helped me understand that every human being has dignity. Every human being has worth. Every human being, regardless of the color of their skin or their station in life, matters in the grand scheme of things. And as I later came to understand even more, we all matter in the sight of God. How can we differentiate so easily on the basis of skin color or ethnicity? It changed my life being there in Mississippi, and Mary Meredith was a really big part of that. Charles and Shirley Johnson, who lived in Meridian, Mississippi, were dear friends of my parents as well. And over time, they became some of our dearest friends. They became like family. We had the same last name. Charles and Shirley were also pivotal figures in our lives at helping us understand that, yes, there are differences culturally. There are differences based on the homes that we've grown up in and the families that we associate with and the neighborhoods that we live in. But to the very end of Charles's and Talmadge's lives, they called each other brothers. They had different skin color. They probably never voted for the same guy for president, but boy, they were fast friends. They were brothers indeed, and I will always be grateful for that move to Mississippi that helped me understand that we have to live generously with our hearts toward other people, regardless of the differences that may be apparent to the outside world. You know, uh, I refer at times on the podcast to the fact that you know, having grown up in a very Christian, uh, sometimes almost sheltered environment, that there are times where, you know, that kind of background for some people will almost negate the significance of what somebody is saying. But for me, I have found that the truth that comes from growing up in attempting with God's help to lead a good life, that there's a lot of value in that. There are some safeguards. There's a sense in which it helps lead one on a right path. And so when I refer to scripture from time to time, I'm not trying to convince you of a certain worldview or a certain ideology, but in this particular case, studying generosity as I did for almost 2.5 years in a very intense sort of way, I am moved by certain scriptures that have underscored, um, you know, what I've been studying from an academic standpoint. So here's one: Proverbs 11:25. This is I think I hope it's an encouragement to you to think in terms of living generously toward others. Proverbs 11:25 says, "The generous person will prosper. Those who refresh others will themselves be refreshed." Prosper in this sense doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be rich in terms of your bank account, but it does, in my mind, lead us to believe that the life of one who refreshes others will prosper in all of the right ways. You will live a more contented life. You will live a life that has a sense of fullness and purpose. Back to that nobility of purpose concept. So, want to just say very quickly that I believe that living generously involves your mind, your heart, and your hands. You have to be moved in order to want to do something good for someone else. So there is an emotional component um, to it. There is an emotional connection to it. But you also have to make a conscious decision that you're gonna do something in terms of generous living towards someone else. And I also believe that living generously will make you better, and it will make the world better in the process. Back to that, can't change the whole world, but you might be able to change the world for somebody. Um, Generosity, as I've mentioned, was modeled in our home. Uh, as we were leading up to the memorial service for my dad, my brother Jeffrey reminded me that our parents were audited one year by the IRS because they couldn't believe that our parents, based on what their income was in that year, had given so much back to the church and to other charitable organizations. My parents were so generous with what God had given them, and I was always struck by that. And I think even when we didn't have a lot of money growing up, they still found ways to share with others. And I'm going to tell a quick story. I'll have Rob throw the picture up here in just a minute. At the church that my dad pastored in Oklahoma City from 1965 to 1975, in the early 70s, they began taking mission trips with what at that time could only be described as almost everybody who was willing to go. uh, it involved the teenagers all the way up to uh, married couples in their 30s and 40s. Um, and we would load up a big bus and a couple of vans and take off down to some city in Mexico. And I got to tag along. I believe it was in 1972 to maybe 73 to Monterrey, Mexico, and and it was a great trip. And we would do again, we would do musical concerts, we would do vacation Bible school programs, we would do work construction projects and that sort of thing. It was quite a trip. And right before we left, 2 or 3 weeks before we left, my mom had taken me to Sears to get me some new athletic shoes. They these shoes were kind of a North Carolina blue, if you know what that means. A little darker than this shirt I'm wearing, but that kind of pretty sky blue, Carolina Tar Heel blue, and they had three white stripes down the side. They looked like Adidas, but they were Sears Winter brands, and Winter as in Winner. They were the Winter brand at Sears was a good-looking knockoff of what the more expensive regular brand was, like Converse and Adidas back in the early '70s. But I love those shoes; they were really nice, and so I took those on the trip. And when we got down there to Monterey at the Fifth Church of the Nazarene, um, in Monterrey, Mexico. It was a nice big church, but the streets were not paved. They were dirt roads, and I remember just being amazed at the number of guys my age who were out playing soccer in bare feet in those dirt streets. And we'd get out there, and I didn't know much about soccer, but I knew how to kick a ball, and I was trying to learn a little bit about it. And I was really struck by this um, one little guy, about my height, really big brown eyes and brown skin and a full head of black hair. And I learned his name was Arturo. And we became fast friends over those 3 or 4 days that we were there, in particular at that church. And it was the day before we were supposed to leave, and I went to my mom and I said, "Hey, mother, Arturo, I really like Arturo. He's a great guy. I wish he could go back to Oklahoma with us." And she said, "Well, honey, that's not possible, you know." I said, "Well, can I at least give him my shoes? He doesn't have any shoes. Come on, mother. I've got more shoes at home." And she said, "Michael, I bought those shoes for you, and we don't even know if they would fit Arturo. why don't we go get him his own pair of shoes? And so we went off to a market, and next thing you know, we're not just buying a pair of shoes. We bought pants and shirts and all kinds of things, and took it back to him. And I remember when we gave them to him, right before we were leaving, Arturo just started crying, and that's Arturo right there in the middle of that picture with his arms folded. And man, Arturo, I'll never forget the look of gratitude in his eyes. And as he waved goodbye as we pulled away in that bus, I was thinking I'm probably never going to see Arturo again, but at least he has some shoes. And I've thought about him many times. And fast forward, about 25 years, a friend of mine was down there, the guy who led those trips into Mexico, a guy named Bob Bolton. He passed away back in October, and we went out for a service, and maybe it was late September when Bob passed, but I know we were in Oklahoma City on October the 7th, and I told this story there. Bob was down doing a site visit in Guadalajara, and a nice-looking, successful businessman pulls up in a black Lincoln and comes inside the church looking for Senor Bolton. And anyway, long story short, Bob says that this man said, would you have brought a group to Monterrey, Mexico many years ago? And Bob said, oh, yes. Oh, yes. He said, well, my name is Arturo, and there was a boy from Oklahoma that gave me a pair of shoes, and I never forgot it. And he said, by the way, I'm the vice president of the second largest shoe manufacturer in all of Mexico. Bob was just flabbergasted, and later when he told me this story, I just kind of broke down a little bit. All I had done was have a sense that I had something that my friend Arturo needed, and I wanted to give it to him. My mom wisely decided that it would be better to give him something of his own and maybe a little extra. And I never have gotten over that story, because it was the prompting to do something good for this boy that was my age, whom I've never seen since, but I've been connected to him in that story for the rest of my life. That's over, I'll be 64 in February. I guess that's, like 52, 53 years ago. It's just unbelievable to think about. I think one of the things that I want to say is that in this life, we have the capacity, like Max Lucado said in his book, Outlive Your Life, to do things that will make a difference for people for years to come. In fact, I want to share a quote here. I'm going to read this quote from Max Lucado's book, Outlive Your Life, and we'll start wrapping this thing up. Here's what Lucado said. Life is racing by, and if we aren't careful, you and I will look up and our shot at it will have passed us by. Some people don't bother with such thoughts. They grind through their days without lifting their eyes to look. They live and die and never ask why. But you aren't numbered among those kinds of people. You aren't numbered among them. It's not enough for you to do well. You want to do good. You want your life to matter. You want to live your life in such a way that the world will be glad you did. As I think about what I want to achieve in 2024 and beyond, it's not necessarily doing things that people will notice, but it is being involved in the process of encouraging people to do good in this world, to give good things to others freely and abundantly, to live with a heart of overflowing generosity that wants good things to happen, not just in your own life, but in the lives of others. This world, it's cliche to say it, but this world is a mess. Just because it's a cliche doesn't mean it isn't true. We got a mess on our hands, folks. And there's a lot of things that we can't do anything about. But as much as it depends on us, let's do good in the lives of other people. Let's live good lives. And in the process, I believe that greatness is just around the corner. We can do this, but it's going to take all of us making up our minds to live in such a good way that the world will be positively impacted by the decisions that we make. Um, Hebrews 10:24 and 25 talks about um, figuring out how we can spur one another on to love and good works, and to keep meeting together and encouraging one another. Find you some people who you can encourage and who will encourage you to do the next right thing, to do the next good thing. And if we do that, like we've always said here on the podcast, if we'll get out there in the middle of doing something good for somebody else, it's going to make a big difference for all of us. I'm so glad you're here. I can't wait to share a lot more episodes of Michael in the Middle as we get underway here in this new year. I'll sign off with a memory to with a nod to a memory that I have of listening to Jerry House and the House Foundation in Nashville years ago. I don't know exactly what would come in the morning show, but at one point, Reverend Howard Olds, who was the pastor at Brentwood United Methodist Church back in the day, would come on and offer a brief good word, and Pastor Olds would sign off his little segment by saying, "Make it a good day. Make it a good day. Make it a good week. Make it a good year by doing good. It's going to make all the difference in the world."